Good morrow unto ye, fellow scribes. This is Welsh Pixie, and I have an awesome new video for you for Scrolls Portal. Yay! Today I'm going to be taking a look at some facts that we know about Scrolls that I've been picking up from various websites. So let's get started. This is gamasutra.com. They had an interview with Notch and Jacob on there. So they start by asking, how does the fighting happen in Scrolls? What happens is you have a board that's like a chessboard, and each player has one side of the board. And for example, if one player has a scroll that summons a demon, they pay some resources, they have resource management, and then they'll place that scroll, the demon scroll, on the game board. And when it attacks, it'll attack in a straight line. But if the other player has buildings in the way to block the attack, it won't get to them or hurt them. But if the attack gets to the other side of the playing field, it will harm them. And he goes on to say it's not easy as putting a scroll here and the other player putting a scroll there and then sitting back and relaxing. Each unit has abilities, so for example, one may be able to move one step each turn, or maybe its attack can't be blocked by another unit unless that unit has more life than it. And it's lots of different kinds of scenarios that can throw curveballs at you. So you could maybe build an offensive line of units that you lump together as a spearhead attack, but maybe the other player can build a siege weapon that does area damage, so it'll hit everyone. So you might want to spread your scrolls out. So you've got a deck, build a deck that counters certain elements. So you've got that, so my opponent might try to do this, but if I can add this thing to my deck, then it'll prevent that outcome at least. He says it's all about balancing your set of scrolls, so you have a strategy about how you're going to win, but also filling some blanks in your defenses. And Gamasutra asks, each team then has a sort of king unit that you need to destroy to win, or do all the units need to be destroyed? Jacob says you can summon scrolls, and it doesn't matter if the scrolls are destroyed. To win the game, it's the player you have to kill. So your units can kill me, but that's only one way to win. There's going to be multiple ways. You can use spells or remove all my scrolls so I don't have any scrolls left. So if you run out of scrolls, then that's the game over. Yes, he replies, you can't play anymore. That's one way of winning the game. There's tons of ways you'll be able to mess with the opponent's head, like destroying resources so that they can't cast any spells. There's going to be lots of different strategies you can use to win the game. Next, they ask if there's a release period in mind. Jacob says they don't think they have a fixed date, but the first thing they're going to do is release the closed alpha. That's going to be the chance for them to add content and remove content, depending on how it all works. And there's going to be a sign-up period so that people who are interested can sign up at scrolls.com. And then they ask, so other than through the single player, how do players earn scrolls? They'd like you to be able to battle for a card, so maybe the winner gets to draw a card from the loser's deck, or you can say in advance, for example, we'll be playing for these cards, but they have to explore whether they'll need a gambling license to be able to do that, but they'd like to have that as an option. So I'm going to talk about the story of Scrolls. It'll be a fantasy setting. Jacob is a big fan of the fantasy world. But they don't want to make something very typical. They want to mix it up a bit. But it's going to be heavily based on Tolkien, he said. And then they ask, is it all 1 versus 1, or is it going to be team play? And they've said they would like to add some team play in. In the beginning, it's going to be 1-on-1, but if the game is well liked and gets an audience, then they can introduce 3 players against each other, or 2v2, and so on. And then they say the closed alpha, is that going to follow the same format as Minecraft, or with a cut price to join and a bumped up price later on? And they say the closed alpha won't cost any money, and they're just going to shower content on people who are signed up and ask them to try it and play with it and tell them what they think to see what cards and stuff work well. And then they're going to take everything away and move on to the open beta, and that's when the actual game starts. So the closed alpha will be like how normal games behave at the beta. So if you were the beta tester for the latest release of WoW, you can get to a certain level. As soon as the game is finished, they make you start over again. So that's how their alpha will work. Then they talk about pricing. They haven't decided on a price yet, but the game itself will be free for anyone. But the content of the game, the scrolls, you can buy packs. So they want people to be able to try the game before they buy it. So he says off the top of his head, you invest say €10 in the game and you get 60, 70, 80 or whatever scrolls, and then you've expanded your collection, and there'll be random cards that you get from the pack, so you'll be lucky to get a rare card. So when you're buying a pack, you're not buying a specific set. It'll be like buying card packs like Magic the Gathering. You'll get random cards in there and you might get lucky and get a rare. And then they ask, are we looking at a PC-only release? And he says the first release is going to be PC and Mac, and you'll be able to install it. And then there's also the possibility of playing on a browser. So now we move on to Rock, Paper, Shotgun. They also did an interview with some slightly different information in there. And they've quoted them saying, at the core it's a collectible card game, but it's also a board game. It's combining both. You place your units or your buildings and your siege weapons, and you place them on a game board to play against your opponent. It's not just about designing a proper collection of scrolls, and the tactical aspect of the deck is also about the tactical sense of how to place your unit on the game board. So players will buy the game and they'll have a random starter deck of scrolls, and if they want more they can buy additional card packs, and they won't know what they'll receive. They have many other plans for adding to your deck. So they say it's not going to be a multiplayer game. We have a lot of fun ideas. Sorry, it is going to be a multiplayer game. They have a lot of fun ideas for the community. They're going to let you place your scrolls in an auction house, trading with other players, and a lot of different multiplayer templates. So ranging from a friendly game, testing out your latest deck, or you may enter into a more long-term league where you get ranked. That could go on for a couple of months. And they also plan on having tournaments, like small ones and big ones, and world championships. And they're talking to some great partners about that, they say, so that's exciting. And they say another factor is the fact that you have the game board. You won't be able to be a successful player unless you learn to take advantage of the game board. So you can have an imp and place it, but the board is busy and his opponent has cast spells that prevent me from placing units in certain areas. The game board is dynamic. You need to manage your units constantly, work out how to protect them, heal them, shield them. So it'll be almost like a role-playing element. You can give creatures items, for instance. So maybe you invest heavily in a unit, give it a sword, you want to keep it alive. You'll want to make more long-term strategic choices in the game. They say despite being able to buy additional cards, they promise it won't be a game you can beat by pouring in money. It's all about how you put your deck together, they emphasize. The tactical element is twofold. You create the deck and then you play it. So there are going to be some elements of random chance in the game as well, just to keep players on their toes. So you won't have to have the same strategies every time, because different circumstances will force you to modify your strategy as you play the game. So they've asked for an example, and he's gone on to explain the game has a certain space where you can place your units. So perhaps you want to place them in a spearhead to defeat your opponent's defense and damage him. So you gather them together, but then the opponent has a lot of damaging attacks that do area damage, and then having that kind of strategy will ruin all your attacks and destroy your units in a couple of strikes. That's the simplest example, but it gets much more complicated. Every unit comes with abilities, and apart from these you have spells you can throw out. So you might have a unit that's very powerful against a certain type of unit, but it's not aligned correctly, or you can use spells and abilities so the unit lines up just before the attack and so on. Or maybe you've got a siege weapon that does a lot of damage, but as it fires it does damage to everyone surrounding it. So maybe you can't have your units in front to defend it, so how do you cope with that? Maybe there's a unit that doesn't take damage from siege weapons. It's not going to be that the unit is lousy and this one is great. It's about finding the synergies in your deck so that everything works together. There's also going to be ways of acquiring cards in the game without necessarily paying for them, says Jacob with slight hesitation. Maybe winning them in tournaments or from opponents. The issue is, however, what constitutes gambling. The thing we have to look into is the legal issue, so we don't want to have to get a gambling license and put the servers in Malta to get the game up and running. But he'd like to have a feature where you can win opponents' cards, not forced, but as an option. And then Mojang say you'll be able to buy the game before it's finished, but not quite as early as with Minecraft. And they're going to have a closed alpha first, where they invite a set number of players to test out the game, and then the closed alpha will be a test launch to get some feedback, and then they'll go into beta and make the game available to everyone as it goes through the next stage of the iterative process. They won't have every feature in place, but then they'll start treating it like a proper game, and everyone can sign up and purchase items and start to do the things with the game that they intend. At that point, the development will be pretty much the same as Minecraft. This means new content, new scrolls and environments to do battle in, and new features constantly added. So once everyone's... then they have plans for the development of scrolls, if it goes well, to look at the possibility for a single-player mode. They've learned from surveys that about 70% of players prefer to play alone, so it's a big chunk of the audience. They want to let players explore dungeons, then have adventures, find cards, play in multiplayer. In the process of talking to some fantasy authors with regards to creating a story for a single-player version of the game, so I guess that'll be like a campaign mode. They didn't want to name anybody, that they were both excited by the people they were talking to, and they have said that Penny Arcade's Jerry Hawkins, that's Tycho from Penny Arcade, will be contributing to the backstory. And they want to let the game be hosted on other sites. Now this is cool. They said the idea isn't finalised, but they want it so that a site can host games and tournaments. And there's also plans for it to go multi-platform, eventually reaching smartphones and similar. The initial development is for PC and Mac. So they say at this stage it's a little tricky to understand completely how Scrolls will play. They know there are cards and the dynamic game board, and they know that the real focus is on layers and layers of tactics. They want to create a highly competitive game, something that'll spin off into large-scale tournaments for the very best players. Apparently the game is already in playable form, even only with a prototype design. They don't want to show the design, but closed alpha could be happening by the summer, with a plan to see the beta on sale around November or December. So that'll be really good. Then Kotaku say the Scrolls features the fun and collectible card games with the strategy element of board games, and as players' placement of units, buildings and siege weapons on a game board are vital to victory. Scrolls also offers a strong metagame strategy aspect, as players will assemble their collection of scrolls prior to entering battle mode. Spells, units, equipment and resources must be managed just right to be successful. The game will be available on Scrolls.com later this year and will support single match play as well as global tournaments. PC Gamer then have said you play Scrolls online against other players or offline in a campaign mode. Each player chooses a selection of scrolls representing creatures, spells and structures under their control and chooses where to place them on the board. The board is divided so that you control only one side, and as your units attack, they charge across your opponent's side of the board and will damage him unless blocked. As every unit comes with a variety of different abilities, it's not as simple as just placing your units in front of your opponents to feel safe. You need to pay close attention to the positioning of your opponent's units, siege weapons and building, and adjust your strategy accordingly. So on a broader level, the game is about acquiring the cards, the scrolls. Players can buy packs of randomly selected cards for real money, or they can earn them for free by playing the single-player campaign against the AI. Some cards can only be bought and others can only be earned, but all of them can be traded on the auction house for in-game currency. And they said, what features did you want to add? Scrolls features a game board, they go on to say as well. Lots of tactics, interesting design opportunities for the scrolls. And it's designed to be played on a computer, so they have the ability to add effects that'll be too complicated to keep track of otherwise. So units in Scrolls don't heal up at the end of your round. The life pool will diminish as they're being damaged, and they'll eventually die. So that's interesting. Do cards represent things you can just deploy and forget about, or are they like units in a strategy game that you can control? He says you'll certainly have to manage them to get the most out of your gameplay. Some can be moved around, some of them need to stay still. He goes on to talk about lots of tactics involved. And they said you acquire scrolls by purchasing spell books, which contain a set number of randomly inserted scrolls. So that's the same thing again. And he says players can decide how much they want to spend on the game. And players will be able to buy spell books, and they'll be the packs of scrolls. He says some scrolls can only be bought and others can only be obtained by playing the single player adventure, so that's cool. And there's going to be an auction house, they say again, to get scrolls through single player, and they're looking into being able to trade cards directly with other players, and they're not sure if they can about the feature, but they do want to put in some form of card trading. They've said examples of cards. They had a unit that over time could become very powerful, but the side effect was you also increased the time the unit would attack. So on its own, the unit was harmless, but it never got to attack until you placed it next to another unit who gave an attack to whatever was next to it. And he says, you take scrolls from the same pool of resources, but the resource type used to play scrolls vary it. It'll be very hard to successfully play a deck that uses more than 2 resource types. And it'll be an abstract board, and single player will be different. He says matches might be similar to facing another player, and then sometimes you'll face a large creature with different abilities. So that's quite fun. So yeah, I hope you've learned a lot from this. I certainly did, reading through all the articles. Remember, you can visit us on twitter.com/scrollsportal. Follow us on there. Like us on facebook.com/scrollsportal, and we'll have the Scrolls Portal website up soon. That'll be at scrollsportal.com. Thank you. Bye.